Welcome to Breck Buzz. I'm your Communications and Marketing Coordinator, Haley Littleton, and today I'm here with our Director of Finance, Brian Waldes.
Hello.
So we are going to talk about everyone's favorite topic, which is money, and how we use money and how we get it and how we spend it. So I think when people look at the town budget and they look at numbers in isolation, it's a little bit confusing and it doesn't tell the whole story. So why don't you talk a little bit about the genesis of the budget and how we go about that and how we delineate our spending?
Sure. Well, each year the town council is responsible for approving a spending plan or a budget. It's a legally binding document and it takes a lot of work for staff to generate that budget based on what we've been hearing from council all year long. So the department heads and the town manager's office work very hard to generate a proposed budget for council to review at our budget retreat. And I brought some props to show
us, please.
What we do is first we work.
It is.
It's a lot of work. See, it's two binders in a book. We start with the first binder where all the departments, you can see all those pages of departmental budget pages, and these are reviewed by the budget team, which is the finance department, and the town manager's office goes through this first binder, and then after that we make a second binder, which is the proposed budget, and this is what goes to town council. Gotcha. And they review that, and then we have our budget retreat, and then after that, and if anybody's still watching, we have a third book, which is actually the published book, and this is the 2017 document. These are the 2018 proposed budget documents, so we'll have our 2018 book coming up in a few months. But it's a long process. We start budgeting really in spring. Again, talking to council at the different council meetings about what they want to see in the upcoming year. So we have a pretty good idea of what's going to be in the document when we start the process. But then the devil's in the details. We review everything from office supplies all the way on up to the large capital expenditures. So it's an involved process.
And so when you're thinking about next year's budget, how do you project what revenue is, what money's going to be? Talk a little bit about that.
We try to be conservative when looking at revenue. As most people are probably aware, we've had really robust revenue growth since the end of the recession. Since about late 2009 to 2010, we've seen between 3 and 6% revenue growth every year since then. So how we budget is not to anticipate that kind of growth. What we do is we predict a 1% growth over the current year amount. And that way we're being conservative. We wouldn't have to amend our spending plan if all of a sudden the economy comes to a screeching halt. So what we do then is, if we do have that excess revenue from the prior year, we let council know how much is there to use mostly for capital projects. Right. But also recently we've been doing things like increasing transit services and some other services around town. So it's a combination of the two, really. But
it's not as if we just have this one large chunk of money that we kind of choose where it goes. Certain funds have to be used for certain projects, right?
That's true. The town has 18 funds. Some of them are discretionary. For example, we have a cemetery fund. We also have a marijuana fund, and those are funds that we made on our own because we wanted to have those particular programs separate. But we also have funds like the water fund, the golf fund, which are what are called enterprise funds, and those are run very much like businesses. They can't get tax subsidies. Well, they can have some tax subsidies, but there's rules around the amount of tax dollars that can go to those programs. So really, when you look at your water fund and your golf fund, those are funded primarily by fees. And then we have other categories of funds like special revenue funds, which would be your affordable housing, your open space fund, your marketing fund, and those get designated dollars from tax sources. So the accommodations tax, for example, goes into the marketing fund and must be used for marketing. So that's legally restricted. Same goes for affordable housing and for open space. Those are legally restricted revenue sources that go into those funds and have to be used for that purpose. So while it sounds a little crazy that we have 18 funds, it actually, there's a reason for it, there's a logic behind it. And when you're running as many programs as the town of Breckenridge is, you actually get to 18 funds pretty quickly.
Pretty quickly. Yeah. So what you're doing is, you have a blueprint or a structure, and you're going to council saying this is what we have and this is what we can do with it. Great. So what then are kind of the big headers for the 2017 and 2018 budget looking forward?
Well, in 2017, The big single item and probably the most visible project in town is the Breck Center.
Right.
So that remodel is a total of $17 million for everything you see happening there. That includes the new tennis facility that's being built kind of separate outside the Breck Center itself. And that will go from 2017 into 2018, the project itself. But that was really a big 2017 item. In 2018, we're starting to look at putting infrastructure in place for the potential new parking structure.
Right.
So that would involve some more roundabouts. Those are probably going to be required by CDOT in order to put that parking structure on their road. Really, that's what North Park is. Also, we'll be looking at some other large capital projects, Oxbow Park, which is kind of just north of town, near where the Blue 52 is going to be. So that's another capital project. And then, of course, the parking structure itself, which will actually be debt financed. So that's not in the budget necessarily right now. When we do get to a number for that, and we do have a plan for actually getting stuff in the ground, that's when we'll look at some debt financing for the parking structure. So.
And then what about the water plant?
You know, I'm glad you mentioned that. The water plant is probably the biggest single thing we've done in the last 10 years. So the water plant is in the 2018 budget. We have already begun site improvements out there, some demo of the buildings that were out there. And we're in the process now of putting the last pieces in place to borrow the $58 million. That is the current cost of the second water treatment plant. And actually, almost half of that money is actually for the pumps and the pipes to bring the water all the way from right by the reservoir up to the plant and then up to the storage tank in the Highlands. So
really what it seems like we're spending a lot of money on is infrastructure.
Yes, it's symptom of success is kind of what we call it. Town's business is way up. We have more visitors coming in. We have, some growth in the local population as well. So with that comes more tax revenue, which is great. But there's also challenges associated with the growth. The water plant, there's more load on the water system.
Right.
And we have such busy weekends and such peak demand now that we need more capacity. And also having a single point of failure in the current system is no longer an acceptable circumstance. And then, of course, cars. Yeah. Parking in transit has been a challenge for a long time. The lift ticket tax that was implemented in the last budget cycle was meant to address those challenges. And with that additional revenue stream, we are planning to fund the debt for the garage. Right. But we've also put in some of the roundabouts, and we've increased transit a lot. Transit has gone up over $1 million in service levels. So that's been a huge challenge. But it's one thing or the other. When you're contracting, there's a bunch of challenges with that, like there were during the recession. And when the economy's great, that's great. But there's going to be another whole set of challenges. So that's what the 2018 budget is trying to address.
And so apart from infrastructure, we also fund a lot of community organizations, right? If you want to talk a little bit about that.
Yep, we have partner organizations in town. We have the Breckenridge Tourism Office, which is really like the town's marketing arm that markets the town both on the Front Range and in other markets. That is funded through our Special Projects Fund, our marketing fund. The BTO is funded through the marketing fund with those dollars that are required to be used for marketing. Then we have the Breckenridge Heritage Alliance, which is a great partner organization that takes care of a lot of our historic assets and infrastructure in town. A lot of the buildings, they do the tours, and some of the museums we have in town. That's another partner organization. And then, of course, we have Breck Creative Arts, who run the entire arts district, plus a lot of the programs, WAVE, and some of the other great stuff you see around town is run by the BCA, the Creative Arts. And those are funded through the Special Projects Fund.
The Special Projects Fund.
Yes.
So we've got infrastructure, we've got arts, we've got community organizations, a lot of stuff that the budget goes to. So I guess talk a little bit about how we're doing, how are we growing, what's the economic health of the town, and what taxes or sectors do you really see growing in Breckenridge?
Well, like we talked about earlier, there's been tremendous, year over year, there's been very strong revenue growth, again, between 3-7%, and that's been going on since 2009, 2010. So after 7-8 years of that, you're looking at some really elevated revenue streams. A few things, again, that comes with challenges in terms of the activity in town, the challenges you're going to have around your infrastructure to service the source of all that revenue, which is invariably people, more people in town. Right. So, but we've seen growth really in all sectors. There hasn't really been anything lagging. The real estate transfer tax, which is based on real estate sales in town, has been growing. That's a little more unpredictable. That thing can jump 10%, and then it can flatten out. It's a lot more variable than the other sources of tax revenue, but property tax has been up, and the sales and accommodations taxes have been up as well. So really we've seen growth in all sectors fairly consistently at a pretty high rate for a lot of years. And someday it's going to slow down. Whenever we have our budget retreat, we always put up on the screen a graph of our tax revenues over the decades, really. And there's always that dip. And the analogy we use, it's like a yo-yo on an escalator. You know, it's variable with a general upward trend, but we're going to see a slowdown at some point. So we always try to keep that in the back of our minds and try to plan for it by being conservative.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, I think that goes back to the conservative projection model that you were talking about. And maybe a word that's not as common nowadays is surplus. And that with these conservative models, we do end up with a little bit of surplus. And so what happens with that surplus? What do we do with that extra money while we're, projecting conservatively?
Sure. And generally, we never use the term extra money. That's that's something that's we try not to call it that, but no, there is a surplus because of the way we do budget. Not always. In 2008, 2009, we had the opposite. But what we do is do that conservative budgeting convention, because what you can then do is say, okay, here's what, for example, when we're doing the 2018 budget, we can say here's where we were pretty sure we're going to land in 2017. Our revenues will be a little ahead of where we thought they were, so we can put that money to work. In this case, for Oxbow Park or some other capital projects that will need just cash funding. Recently, though, the challenge has been different because we have been changing our service levels, in particular in transit, but also in public works. Transit is in public works, but also around when you have more buses, you need more mechanics. Obviously, we need more drivers. So there's been elevated service levels, and that's something we looked at this last retreat too, because capital expenditures are kind of one-time expenses. There's usually an operating cost associated with a new asset, but in the case of more transit services, personnel stay with you.
Exactly.
And that expense grows every year. So that took a little more analysis to look at, okay, what's our new base level of service and what's that cost each year?
Great.
So those have been our focus.
And so if people want to know more about the budget or more about what we're spending money on and how we spend our money, what can they do?
Well, the proposed budget right now is on our website, townofbreckenridge.com. I think it's under Your Government, Finance, and then right there is a budget link. And you can get the contents of that binder right here. And it makes great reading. It's got a little, this is our accounting sense of humor there. You can see it's got kind of a garage on the front.
Right, it's our new parking garage.
Yeah. That was meant to be funny, so.
We're actually just going to construct it, right?
Right, we said, hey, we can get this for like $79, which was a lot, but kids' toys are very expensive. So, yep, that's all on the website. And then if you want to be part of the process, we'll have 2 budget hearings in November. November 14th and 28th are the 2 meetings in November, and there will be budget hearings at both. And citizens are welcome to come and be heard, review the book, come on in, make a comment. You can just come in and say how great you think it is. That'd be great. Next person to come comment will be the first. So we'd love to have someone come visit us.
Yeah, have someone come and talk about the budget. Yep. Well, so the last thing, Brian, is that, I know that sometimes crunching all these numbers, it can be a little drab, and some people think finance isn't as fun, but I've heard that you have some great jokes.
I have an accounting joke.
I would love to hear one.
Sure.
Yes.
Okay, so one day someone comes in the office, and the secretary says to the boss, what's going on today? He said, I got 3 candidates for the accounting job. Okay. And I want you to give them each a copy of this note. And she looks at the note. The note just says, what's 1 + 1? Right. So 3 candidates come in, gives a note to each of them. The one goes in the office, comes out 2 seconds later, didn't get the job. Second goes in the office, comes out 2 seconds later, didn't get the job. The third one goes in there, stays in for an hour, comes out, and the boss comes out and says, this is great that person got the job. So finally we're talking after, and the secretary asked the boss, how did you pick a candidate just based on a simple question? He said, well, the first 2 said 2, and the third candidate said, well, what do you want it to be? Yes. That's it. That's all I got. That's as funny as accounting gets.
I thought it was great.
Not bad, right?
Yeah, not bad.
It's my accounting joke. You can all use it. If anyone's still watching, you can use the accounting joke.
You have free reign. Well, Brian, thank you for coming and being a guest. I think learning more about how the town finances its money is helpful in understanding how it functions. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It was fun.
Yeah.